Hey, I'm Christina Rea, and welcome to Breaking Out of Breaking In, a practical filmmaking podcast about taking your creative career into your own hands and making great work that gets seen without playing the Hollywood game.
Or at least while changing the rules. Hi, I'm Brie Castellini, your other co-host, and today we're breaking down the WGA. If you'd like to suggest an upcoming topic, send us a compliment, ask us a question, or otherwise get in touch, you can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at BreakingOutPod, or via email, breakingoutofbreakinginpod@gmail.com. And if you want deeper dives into everything that we cover on this podcast, subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/breakingoutpod. For just $3 a month, you'll get bonus content like templates, curated learning, custom infographics, and more. But enough of us. Let's talk about our wonderful guest for today's episode. We are so excited to introduce you to our esteemed guest, an alum of my graduate program and the vice chair of the Latinx Writers Committee of the WGA, Jorge Rivera. Welcome, Jorge.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
So I guess just to start off with some introductions, when people ask you what you do, what is your answer?
What do I do in the context of my professional life or within the Guild?
Both, either.
I'm a TV writer and producer by trade. I've been out here in Los Angeles for about 7 years with trying to do that with varying degrees of success and some challenges like many people face when they get here. About 5 years into that, or 2 years or so ago, well, actually, once I started engaging the Guild out here as a member, I started attending what was called the Latino Writers Committee at the time as a member, as a participant. And about 3 or 4 years into that, I threw my hat into the ring to be elected as one of the leaders of that committee. And so I am the vice chair, along with two other chairs, my other two chairs, Danny Tolley and Yvette Vargas, and we're the leaders of that committee. And we're part of a consortium of different committees that covers many different underrepresented groups, which is a part of the Inclusion and Equity Department at the Guild. So it sounds like a very important position. It kind of is to our community in terms of the hierarchy of the Guild. It is sort of on the low rungs of the Guild. But it's still very important, I think, work is being done at that level because we're sort of in the trenches with everybody who is experiencing whatever they're experiencing as writers and Latinx people within the writing community of the Guild and in the entertainment business. So we can get a little deeper into that. I do want to say, though, everything that I talk about today is as a civilian. I don't want to present to be a legal representation of the Guild in any way, but happy to talk about anything that I know about the Guild in that context.
Yeah, we will definitely get into like the nitty gritty of just like how the Guild works. I think that a lot of people, especially aspiring screenwriters, see it as this like secret society that they just cannot figure out how to get into. Yeah. Like, what is the Illuminati signal I need to do? But let's take a step back for a second. So first of all, what TV shows do you write for, in case you have unknown fans out there? And then we'll talk a little bit like back in the beginning.
Yeah.
So where do you write?
I think my biggest claim to fame in terms of scripted television was a show that was short-lived on Fox Television. I was in the Fox Writers Intensive a few years ago, and out of that I got staffed on a show called APB, which, by the way, was show ran by Matt Nix. I know you guys, I don't know if you still do the Burn Notice podcast, but
I do. We're in season 5.
Okay, there you go. Okay. So that might be an interesting topic to talk about a little bit, because Matt was my boss for a little while during that period. Great boss, great experience. And I mean, on the scripted side, that's mainly the thing I'm mostly known for. I've done a lot of work on the non-scripted side as a non-writing producer for a bunch of true crime shows before I really got actively involved in the Guild here in the West. So I have a lot of credits in that space. But since then, the last 3 years have been interesting. Partly because we did have a dispute with our agents, and everyone fired their agents back in 2019, I think it was. So we were all agentless for 2 years, which was very kind of challenging but rewarding. We won that fight in a big way. So even though it was a tough couple of years, we definitely did the right thing. And then the pandemic hit. So it's been really tough to find work in rooms. Not a lot of shows are in production, or were, like, a lot of shows had shut down or kind of put the pause button on. So I've been doing a lot of development in the last couple of years, meaning developing a lot of my own work and going out to sell it and pitch it and getting hired to develop other people's work, which is another sort of avenue of employment that isn't really spoken about much in the world. I think people focus largely on staffing and wanting to staff and climbing that ladder, which is obviously the crown jewel in many ways for TV writers. But there is a whole world that exists outside of that doesn't involve being on a TV show, which is, the development world, which is getting hired and paid to develop ideas that may or may not actually go into production sometimes.
Yeah, that is interesting. I bet that the reason a lot of people overlook that is because like a lot of our listeners and Christina and I both very much come from like indie production. And so in the indie world, development is the free work.
Yeah.
You don't even have a hope of getting paid until you have like something fully developed and ready to bring to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's definitely dive into that.
Sure.
But the first anecdote that I want to talk about is so we both went to the same grad program. We both studied under Norman Steinberg, who's this wonderful storied writer in Hollywood and loves to brag about his students. And I remember him bragging about you in my cohort because I was, I think, 2.5 years after you. I was cohort 5, you were cohort 1. And when he realized that I was interested in web series, he was like, oh, you should talk to Jorge Rivera. He got into the Guild with his web series. Yeah. And so the way that Norman tells it is you wrote a web series, you hired yourself as a writer after filling in some paperwork. He wasn't clear on that. And then bing, bang, boom, you were in the Guild. So I'm curious from your side of things, how did you get into the Guild?
Yeah, well, that's almost correct. So it was 2011-ish, 2010, around that time. Well, let me even go further back. I first started doing writing and producing back in 2006 was the first thing I ever wrote and produced. And it was the wild, wild west for web series. It was, YouTube was only a year old at that point. They launched in 2005. And like people were just making stuff and putting it up on the web. And it was really invigorating and pretty exciting. And it was brand new territory. And, the only gatekeeper was really how much you were able to pay and feed your crew. Basically, if you could find a way to do that, you could shoot something and put it up on the web and people will watch it. And then there were all these emerging festivals that didn't exist prior. The New York Television Festival at the time, there was this thing called the Independent Television Festival in LA, and the LA Web Fest. All these different things started sprouting up. The Streamies and the Webbies were brand new. So it was really exciting. Like people were paying attention and watching and consuming. And I was flying to different festivals all over the country and meeting other web series creators. So it was really, people were very collaborative and wanting to work together. So it was really exciting. And so I did that for a while, for many years. And eventually, decided that I wanted to write for television proper, and wound up getting into Norman's program and graduating and coming out here. So it's the sort of the Reader's Digest version of it. But somewhere along the line there, the WGA East was really paying attention to all of that and was really interested in signing people up into the Guild through that work and trying to get people to cover their web series as signatories. And so that was happening a bunch. And I had produced my web series, a couple of them, and they had approached me and asked me if I was interested in doing that. But I didn't actually do it. I wound up not doing it for whatever reason. How I got into the Guild was another web series, friends of mine who produced a series called East Willie B, which kind of was really interesting. It was a Latinx web series that took place in Williamsburg. It was about gentrification. It kind of, in some ways, was the prototype for a few shows that have emerged since then on television. And those guys hired me under a signatory contract. But people were doing the thing that Norman said. People were creating their shows, covering it under a signatory deal, and then getting themselves into the Guild that way. I don't know if that exists anymore exactly that way. I think the Guild at the time, especially the East, was really excited about signing people in new media, and that kind of loophole might have closed since then. I don't know.
Sure.
I haven't talked to anyone who's done it in a long time. So I was doing that for a while. It took me many years to pay off my I guess there's an entry fee, a couple of $1,000s.
Sure.
But by the time I reached LA, and by the time I started actually working in television, all those things sort of converged, and I just transferred my membership to the West, which was great. I'm really, really glad I did that. Only because I'm here physically, and this allowed me to participate in the West in a way that I couldn't if I was an East member.
I didn't realize they were so separate. I assume they were just sort of like, well, this is the office you
Yeah,
go to if
me
you're in the
too.
East versus West.
I don't fully understand that separation either, to be honest. Like I think when it comes to things like negotiating MBAs and negotiating with studios and networks and the whole ATA thing that we did, when it comes to big movements like that, suddenly they coalesce and they become one. But like, other than that, so they operate under the same contracts and stuff, but I think they like the day-to-day business kind of is very separate. And so you're either East or West as a member. And I when I moved out here, I wasn't sure if I was going to stay it took me about a year before I decided, yeah, this is working. And about that, it was around that time when I transferred.
And can you really quickly define like signatory?
Yeah.
And what that means?
Sure. So it's just signatory is basically someone who says, I'm going to do this project under the guild rules, and they fill out paperwork and they become a signatory, and the project that they're doing is officially WGA, and they have to play by the WGA rules and hire WGA writers and hire at those rates. And so that's basically, it's the difference between union and non-union. And I think it's the same thing for actors and for DGA, right? So like, you guys know, you've done a lot of indie work. You know, you may or may not have gone under those contracts. I don't know. It becomes more expensive when you do that. So a lot of people don't do it. And I understand that. But also it opens up a lot of doors in terms of the quality of the people that you get on your projects, and also where and how you could screen the projects. So, you know, at some point, you know, be operating in the indie world, you probably want to avoid it to some degree, possibly because of money. But I think at some point, as a production company grows and wants to be taken legitimate and serious, they start engaging the guilds in a serious way, and I think that's important for it's good for everybody all around.
For sure.
Definitely.
So your first gig that you got writing that was paid, do you think that came specifically because you were a member, or would you have gotten it otherwise?
That's a great question. Let's see. I got that gig because I came out of the Fox Writers Intensive. That's how I got the gig. That's another way to get into the guild. If you do a gig, if you get hired on a gig like that, you kind of have to become a member if you haven't already, because because it was a signatory production. So you can't work for the production if you're not. But they allow you to become one. If I hadn't been one, I would have been able to become a signatory. Become a member.
Sure, because you don't need to be a member to get into the Fox Writers lab.
No, but you do to work on a signatory show, and that was a signatory show. So, and
you were a WGA member before the Fox Writers.
Kind of, right? Yeah. I was an East member, but I was like an associate because I hadn't really finished paying my membership. So it was like But by the time I got an APB, all that stuff I had transferred, I had paid my dues, my membership fee, so everything was all lined up. So by the time I got an APB, I was a member. But before that, I was like this weird associate, not quite full member status. It was that moment. It all kind of crystallized right around that time. Yeah.
So I'm curious about that in the interstitial associate time. Like, what, from your perspective, like, made you want to, go forward with the guild, especially since you've been approached before and decided not to go with it? And what opportunities did it afford you that you wouldn't have had otherwise? So it sounds like APB was sort of a separate thing, and you could have been or not been in the guild. But what about that median time?
Yeah, I think, that's a really, really great question as well, because once you become a guild member, you really you're not supposed to do anything but signatory work. That means legitimate studios and networks are hiring you. And for a while, I think some people jumped the gun and they tried to get into the guilds a little ahead of schedule. I feel like there's a period of time when you're starting out as a new writer where you want to do as much work as you can to sort of cut your teeth a bit. And a lot of that work comes from the non-signatory world, right? Independent productions, independent web series, your own stuff, other people's work, like student work, like when you come out of school, you just want to do as much as you can just to sort of build your skill set and your muscles. And if you're in the guild too soon, you kind of technically, legally, you're supposed to be turning that work away unless it's signatory, right? So I think there's a period of time where I think it could be too early. I suggest take a couple years out of school and just do whatever work comes your way, because it's great. You can get paid, you won't get paid WGA rates, but you can get paid doing work for indie productions that aren't signatory for a little while, and build your credit list. And I think that's an important thing. But at some point in your career when you're actually working on signatory projects is when, and you only want to do that exclusively, is when you should probably join the guild, because at that point you're turning away non-signatory work. So I think there's a gray area where people kind of jump ahead of themselves. And I think the tipping point should be this. I think you should spend a few years as a writer out of school doing just as much work, any kind of work, writing work that comes your way. And there's a lot floating around out there that's not signatory. And you should do it. You should take it for a while and build your credit list. And then one day, that sort of legitimate signatory gig will come, and then it's time to jump in, and then you kind of have to like not look back towards the non-signatory work anymore. You're not supposed to take that work because you're now a union member and you want to play by union rules and support the union efforts. So what was the question? The question
was what were you doing in that in between time where you were still paying off your dues that you couldn't have done before, and did you find that it was a valuable period of your life?
Yeah. I was taking a lot of non-signatory work. I was doing some unscripted work. I did a lot of work in the true crime space as a non-writing producer. So I did a lot of that work during that time. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff you could be doing, a lot of work out there that's non-signatory. That's what I would be doing, like just that kind of work and building credits. Because once I got into the guild, I kind of had to like leave that stuff behind, and that's fine. A lot of young writers, before they build their credits and before they're sort of accepted as a professional, jump into the guild. But then it's tough because you're in this place where like you haven't really proven yourself yet. So like, it's really hard to get signatory work unless you've proven yourself. So if you had taken the time to build a credit list and you have a nice little IMDb profile with like 5 or 6 credits on there, then it's easier to be taken legitimate as a legitimate writer once you make the leap. Some people do that before they have credits, and then they have nothing to show for it, and it's harder to get those gigs, believe it or not. But once you get into the guild, I think the value is manyfold. Personally, what I love about it the most, I mean, not only do they fight really hard for writers' rights. I mean, we just won a big victory over our agents in packaging, right? That was like huge. We were getting really screwed, and it strengthened numbers, and it was very dramatic. And there was a contingency within the guild that kind of was arguing with the larger battle, the larger leadership. So it was really like stressful, but like the smarter, people prevailed, and we won. And now we have this great piece of, a victory that against a really bad practice. Like packaging was basically agents double dipping. They were taking our 10%, but also taking money on the back end for putting together packages with other talent, and it was kind of illegal. Mm-hmm. So on that level, there's just the leadership, it's the solidarity, just the protections that are in place. Like it's a constant battle, like new things are emerging now, like that we're trying. There's always a battle coming that we're fighting against, because like the entertainment business, is fun and amazing and gratifying as it can be, it's like studios and networks aren't always looking out for the best interests of the talent and the writers. So so having an organization at the guild, like the guild, is amazing to have that protection. So there's that. But so there's those logistics and that kind of those policy things. But on a personal level, it's been an incredible community, like just unbelievable. Like I have hung out with, met with, have become friends with some of my all-time writing heroes. And generally people are very open and very, open to meeting new writers and, getting to know new writers and uplifting new writers. And so that community has been amazing. Like incredible. Like I didn't expect it to be that way. So everyone talks about how the entertainment business is like, it's who you know, relationships. That's partly true. Like, yes, there's some nepotism, but what that means, like when people say that, they immediately think nepotism, like, you know, Joe Schmo is going to hire his nephew's, you know, cousin, that kind of nepotism, which I think happens. It's, you know, but I think largely the who you know thing is really about relationships. And the reason that's important is because people want to surround themselves with people they trust, people that they know are good at their jobs, and people who are not insane, you know, who aren't toxic. That's what generally people want. And that's why the who you know is important. And it's not because like I want to help my friend who isn't talented and sucks. It's mostly because I want to surround myself with the people I know will not screw me over, will carry the ball, will carry their weight, will be generally easy to work with, you know, that I'm not going to go home like wanting to scream into a pillow every night over their behavior. That's what that means. Trust.
Sure.
And the Guild has been an amazing place to earn that trust and to build that trust and to build those relationships with, because I rub shoulders virtually and physically with like people who've written like some of the most amazing television ever, you know, like, and it's genuinely reciprocated, you know? So that's really, I think, the most amazing thing about the Guild is that I didn't realize that going in, but as I started to attend panels and events, and as I became involved in creating panels and events for the Latinx community, you know, those relationships kind of organically just sprouted. And, you know, I feel like I have allies who will either hire me or will advocate for me at the right time, right? All of those things. And, you know, it's those things have happened. And I've done that for other people too. I've done that for up and coming writers. I've done that for people outside of the Guild too, like up and coming writers who aren't in the Guild yet, because like it becomes such the good people in this industry, every single one of them have gotten some kind of help somehow. Somebody's gotten some help from somebody. No one's done this like in a vacuum. And the good people remember that and pay that forward. And there's a culture of that. Like if you're spending any time on Twitter, especially 2 years ago when the ATA movement was happening, there was this whole WGA solidarity thing. And then there was a pre-WGA thing, like upper level WGA writers were helping pre-WGA writers. It's a culture of altruism and helping each other and uplifting each other. And as much as we hear these horror stories about awful showrunners and awful producers, I think they are very much in the minority, in my opinion. I think so. Sure, that stuff exists. There's this article in LA Times last week about a certain agency. There's been there's a showrunner that was in the news yesterday. There was a producer that was in the news a couple of weeks ago. And we all know, you know, about the Me Too movement and one of the monsters in that world. So like they exist, sure. But I think I've been lucky. Just anecdotally, I think the majority of the people that I've met have been fantastic. And I think that's the culture that the Guild tries to achieve. And I think they're mostly successful at doing that. And that's really exciting.
That's encouraging, yeah.
Definitely.
Did you have representation before you were in the Guild, or did it come after?
It came after. It came because I was in the fellowship. And I highly recommend the fellowships. Like there's a lot of debate on Twitter about whether they're effective or not effective. And it's like anything else in the world. Like not everything's perfect. There are pros and cons, but I also think that they've launched some huge careers. Like some of the big names that you admire, like a lot of them, I find out years later that they were in fellowships, and it blows my mind. So, and I personally have experienced them and thought they were useful. You know, got my first gig through one of them. So I highly recommend them. I think they're valuable, but take everything with a grain of salt, because some people go through those experiences and do really well and others don't. And so it's really it has a lot to do with what you put into it, but also has a lot, like, you know, luck is a lot. It has a lot to do. It's just good fortune. Right. You know, there are a lot of great writers in this world who are never discovered. So it takes a bunch of things. It takes effort, it takes talent, it takes help, but also, unfortunately, the stars need to align. too sometimes in order for things to work out. So
do you remember your application to that fellowship? Do you remember like things that maybe you had tried before that hadn't worked that finally worked? Like any high level advice that you can give on applying for fellowships, because it's kind of fellowship season?
Yeah, no, I do this a lot actually, because I had been applying when I was still in Norman's program all the way as far back as like 2011 or 2010 is when I first started applying. I would apply every year. I applied every year for about 5 years in a row, and I would get rejected. And then the last time I applied, I was out here in LA, and I think that made a difference. That was I think that the first thing that made a difference, I think, was that suddenly there was an LA address on my applications. I honestly think that they take that partly into consideration because they want people who are committed, who are serious, who are out here, who are going to do it by any means necessary, whether they get into a fellowship or not. That's one thing I think that it rings bells for them. That's one thing. And I also was getting better and better as a writer. Like I started working with Jen Grisanti at some point in that mix. I don't know if you guys are aware of her.
No.
Jen Grisanti is a pretty well-known, like a teacher, TV writing teacher. I'll email you her information, or you can just Google her, Jen Grisanti, Grisanti. And she runs a business. She's a former television executive. She worked under Aaron Sorkin. She now has a career as a teacher. She teaches all these online programs. I studied with her one-on-one. She's actually the writing teacher for Writers on the Verge, which is the NBC program.
Okay.
And she's really great. She's really like working with her was probably this thing that probably boosted my writing intelligence, my IQ for story and writing, because I had been writing a lot up until then, doing a lot of digital stuff, right? But television has a very specific DNA, especially pilots. And unless you know what to look for and what to bake into your pilot script, unless you know it, you don't know what you don't know. And so working with her, I kind of figured out what I didn't know, and my writing got a lot better. So by the time I came out here at the LA address, my scripts were better. And then I was a semifinalist in ABC, and I blew it. I'll tell you the big mistake I made. So ABC, and a lot of them do this. They will, actually, I think all of them do this. Once you get to a certain level, so, semifinalist, finalist, and then, whether you get in or not.
Sure.
And so I was a semifinalist my first year in LA. I was super excited. I'm like, oh, this is great. Finally, I'm going to get in. And basically what they do is you do a phone interview. And my phone interview was going great. I was having a really great conversation with the person on the other side of the phone. And then they asked me, what shows on ABC do I watch and where do I see myself writing on one of their shows? And I drew a fucking blank. And I was like, I just wasn't prepared to answer that question. It's a legit question because they want to know. Those programs are basically about them placing you on their slate somewhere on their shows. Right. And for whatever reason, I mean, I did watch some ABC shows. I just didn't realize it, kind of. I wasn't thinking about it in that context of that question. So I drew a blank, and I kind of haphazardly answered, and it was a shitty answer. And I think I got dinged and I didn't get in. But since at that point, a good friend of mine who did get in that year told me some great advice. She's like, well, you're now on all of their radars because they track each other. They track all the participants and the entries, and they trade notes. And she was like, you're on all of their radars now. You're a semifinalist. You didn't get in, but you're semifinalist. You should reach out to all of them, all of the administrators, and ask them out for coffee. And I did. And so I did a little tour with everyone from CBS, ABC, NBC, Warner Brothers, whatever else there was. I'm missing a few, and I sat down with them and I asked them, what they're looking for. What's a good application? So I wrote all that stuff down, and I'll share what I learned. But the next year I applied again, and then I got into Fox using everything I learned. But
just before you get into that, Did you use the same samples the second time around?
It depended. I was trying to write new samples every year, and everyone should write samples every year, new samples every year. And the other thing is that a lot of the fellowships still ask for specs of existing television shows. That's happening less and less. I think writers should do specs for a little while because it's good practice. It's good muscle building. Even to this day, like you may not get read, but like that's the job, writing someone else's show. So you should practice doing that. Anyway, so it was a mixture. Like whatever I had that year is what it went out. If I had a new one, it went out. If I didn't have a new one, it didn't. I used something. I reused something. I don't recommend reusing something, but I just did that. I was like, I felt like it was better to at least be in the mix than not at all. But what wound up happening is that I kind of staggered my content, my scripts. Like every year, I would send the new ones out to who didn't get that last year, or I would send the old one out to who didn't get that last year, and then everyone else would get the new one. I was doing some kind of juggling like that. But that year, Fox had not gotten the script that I had written that year. It was fairly new, I think. And so I sent it to Fox and I got in. But what I learned and what I tell everyone is this: your fellowship essay is 100% absolutely also a writing sample. Like they will read that and judge that as a story. And so you have to tell a really good story about yourself in story form. You don't want to be like, I grew up here, I went to the school, I won this award, I produced this thing, I got, I moved here. You don't want to do that. You want to be like, when I was a kid, I saw a dead body fall out of a building and it changed me. It made me want to be a crime writer because I wanted to know who threw that body out the window, right? And I was so terrified, but I faced my fear and I moved forward and I did that. And because of that experience, I like to write intrepid, roving reporter kind of like characters who will always get to the bottom of a mystery. And by the way, here's my sample that shows exactly that. Here's my sample of the Raven reporter doing exactly that. Oh, and by the way, I love your show about the Raven reporter who studies mysteries and won't back down.
Such like a Twilight Zone moment, because this is literally a conversation Christine and I were having yesterday, because I'm a mystery crime writer and I've only recently discovered like that's the brand. All right, that's the brand I'm going for. And so I like sending Christina personal essays of like, all right, what childhood story makes me sound most like a future crime writer?
Exactly. That's exactly it. That's exactly what you should be doing. And I'm not saying that every essay has like, there's this whole debate on Twitter about trauma porn, right? It doesn't always have to be about trauma. It could be something really hilarious, but you want to tell your origin story. Why are you a writer? Why did you become a writer? Like what event in your life made you want to do that? And what is the theme of that story? And that should be the theme of your pilot that you're submitting. And it should also be the theme of the shows that you're interested in writing on that's on their slate. So there's a through line, a thematic through line from your experience to your material to the things you want to do, specifically on their network. And so
actually ABC now has that as a separate essay. Is you have to do a staffing pitch. So instead of you just having to like hopefully remember that you should know what shows are on ABC, they now actually make you pick one.
I'm probably the person why they fucking started doing that.
They're like, we like Jorge, but like we got to make sure
because I screwed that up. Because I screwed it up, and now they're trying to help people from not screwing that up. But that's basically the idea, I think, is that, you want to tell a good story about yourself, whatever that is, real crafted as a story, short, a paragraph or two. You want to connect it to your pilot, to your material that you're sending in thematically. And you also want to connect it to something that's on their slate, because that shows that you know your voice. You're a good storyteller, you know your voice, you know where you want to be, and you're helping them do their job, because they're saying, oh, Breeze would be perfect for that show, or shows like that.
Yeah, you want to give them a package that they can sell, because ultimately they have a vested interest in you being good and them having an easy time placing you. So that totally makes sense.
Yeah. And also when you get into meetings, when you start doing showrunner meetings and general meetings, like you're just doing an oral version of that exact thing. You're telling stories about yourself to another human being sitting across a desk, and you're trying to find a way to connect that to their material. You're basically doing exactly the same thing, but towards a human being and about the show that you want to write for.
Just saying true things strategically.
Yeah. Look, 60% of this job is salesmanship. Not only yourself, but your own show and your own ideas. And if you're in a room, your pitches. It's about being able to communicate to people that you're a good storyteller, that you have good ideas, that you have interesting takes on the world, and you don't have to be, your story doesn't have to be incredibly shocking or like trauma porn or anything like that. It just has to be you. When I finally got into Fox program, we had a meeting of all the new writers who got in. It was 12 of us, and we sat around in the circle and everyone at a table, and everyone was telling their personal stories. Oh, I grew up here. I did this. I did that. The guy that went right before me was a Nigerian prince who got kidnapped and was held for ransom.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's what I had to follow. Wow. With my shitty story of whatever I told. I can't remember what I told. But what I'm saying is, like everyone has interesting parts of their lives, even if like I remember when I first started doing this process, kind of mining my own personal life for what was interesting about it. I was like, I felt really inadequate because I was like, I have nothing interesting to say. Nothing's ever interesting happened to me. But the deeper I dug in, I realized the things that happened to me were interesting in a different way. I wasn't in a military family. I wasn't like, my parents weren't doctors. No one in my family was a serial killer, but
bummer.
Yeah, bummer. But I found things that were interesting to me and who were formative to me and emotionally powerful, and that's really what the job is making an emotional connection with your audience.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great piece of advice.
So if you're a writer who's also a director and you maybe have, like, in terms of passion, they're equal for you, but you want to pursue the writing path and you want to maybe go after these fellowships or just generally get into meetings and pitch, do you think that writers who also are directors should sell themselves as primarily writers, or can you kind of be honest about your passion and ability to do both?
I think it depends on the path. The entertainment business is big, and there's a lot of different ways. If you ask 100 different writers and creatives how they went down that path, you'll get 100 different stories. Obviously, there are multi-hyphenates, and that's really, that can be great. I think it depends. I think if you got to kind of figure out what works for you. For me, I have directed a little bit, but I don't have a huge interest in it. And so I chose to be very specific about what I wanted to achieve and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to present myself, down to the fact that, like, not only am I a TV writer, but I'm a drama writer and an hour long. And not only that, but I really specify on kind of 3 different areas, like crime, genre, and music stuff. Like, that's the stuff I really like. And that's what I do really well. So that's worked for me because it's helped my reps and helped me sort of like present myself to the entertainment world, and it's helped people kind of figure out where to put me. And I think most people should do that. But if you really are like a strong director and you're doing stuff and you're making stuff, then you should put yourself out there in the world as a writer director. But that's going to lead you towards being a feature person, kind of, because that happens mostly in features, right? So you kind of have to look at where you want to be and kind of figure out what's the best story to tell to get there. Not that you can't go, and not that writers don't direct. I've seen writers after they've gotten their foothold in the writing world and have showrun or whatever that have gone and directed episodes, right? But I think the writer director thing, I think that image that projects is kind of something that you see a lot in the feature world. So, if you want to be a feature person, I think that would be a great way to position yourself. But if you want to be,
and then maybe transition later,
because
you've made
you can always grow
somewhere
later. Like, once you have success, like, you could do whatever the hell you want to some degree, right? But in the beginning, in the early days, you really have to be like, this is what I do, this is where I want to be. Because, like, executives, reps, managers, producers are meeting 1 million people a day, and they want the shorthand. Right? They want a good story that you're going to remember. They're going to remember you by, and they want to know what you do, so they can make a quick note about you. So when an opportunity comes up, boom, they can match you and get you wherever that fits, wherever that happens to fit. In the early days, that shorthand is very powerful. And I know people hate it. I always hear like, oh, I like writing comedy, I like writing drama. But it's like, okay, well, you're not helping yourself in the early days by being that ambiguous and that sort of unfocused.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I had a question about how the Latinx Writers Committee sort of functions.
Sure.
Like what does it mean to be a committee in general?
Yeah.
What is your role at that committee?
Yep.
And then we'll wrap up with some grad school talk,
Sure.
unless Christina has any other questions. But yeah, let's talk about Latinx Writers Committee.
Sure.
How did you get involved?
Yeah.
What is it? How does it work?
Sure. So the Guild has this department called the Inclusion and Equity Department, and basically they are focused on issues around diversity and inclusion, and making sure that things are fair and equitable. They do a lot of reporting. They generate a lot of reports on the state of diversity in the industry within the Guild. In that department, there are something like 9 committees devoted to bolstering, highlighting, and uplifting their represented members. And I'm going to get this wrong because I'm not going to remember them all, but there's a Black Writers Committee, there's an LGBTQ committee, there's the Latinx Committee, there's Women's Committee, there's Career Longevity, which is for all writers over a certain age. There's the Disabilities Committee. Did I say Asian? There's an Asian committee, Middle Eastern, Muslim. I think I might have hit them all. I think those are all of them. I'm sure I'm missing something, and I'm going to get an email from somebody complaining that I missed it. But it's basically these groups that meet every other month, and they're open to whoever wants to attend. Like, you don't have to be from one of those represented groups. You can go and attend and be an ally and listen and find out how you can help. But the majority of those committee members are people from those underrepresented groups. And so the idea is just to keep a pulse on the issues that are happening that affect their group members, keep a pulse on those issues, and try to create programming and help with informing policy within the Guild around those issues, like what's going on in the trenches. So the meetings will happen every other month or so, and during COVID, we'd have them on Zoom, and sometimes we'd have like 100 people showing up to these meetings. Basically, it's sort of a community gathering, but also with some very well-defined and structured programming to help move the needle for writers. Like, we will do things like have these meet and greets with showrunners, where showrunners, it's kind of like speed dating. Showrunners will show up, will come up. We've done these on Zoom recently. Like the Zoom, we'll set up general Zoom meetings for our members with showrunners. So a showrunner will commit, and they'll do like 4 meetings, and we'll get like 40 showrunners to do this. And so like suddenly we've got 120 meetings happening for our members. Something like that, if the math is right. So things like that, and panels. We did a sit down with Netflix recently to ask them about their efforts with, to have a conversation about Latinx representation at Netflix. We're doing a anti-bias workshop in next month. We're addressing sort of anti-bias issues or bias issues within the community, within the Latinx community. And so all of the committees are doing these kinds of things, but they're also a touch point for the community, for the community outside of the Guild to a certain extent. Like, for example, when all of the George Floyd protests were happening this year, and those tragedies were happening, and they haven't stopped happening, but like the Black Writers Committee wrote an open letter to Hollywood and about those issues and representation on screen. So that's another thing. Like, we're trying to find ways to keep the studios and networks sort of honest and held accountable for representation, like on the screen and behind the screen. So it's a whole bunch of different things, but at the end of the day, it's really about trying to move the needle for underrepresented groups, and ours specifically for Latinx writers.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And what is the role of the vice chair?
I don't know. When I figure it out, I'll let you know.
Great.
No,
Perfect.
it's like it's a little amorphous. Like, there's no like hierarchy. There's 3 of us, right? There's 2 chairs and a vice chair, and basically we hold a meeting. Our responsibility is to hold a meeting every other month, and also to report on what we're working on. So this is what we have coming up. Like, and each of us will take on different events. Like, I'm producing the event for anti-bias, the anti-bias workshop, and it's going to be a 3-part workshop where we're going to have this group called Soul Focus Group, which is a really great organization that basically holds workshops for identifying racism and giving tools to the participants of those workshops to deal with racism from both ends, as a perpetrator and as a recipient. So it's like just awareness workshops. That's what I'm working on for our community. And then, like, Yvette was in charge recently of doing the Netflix thing. So she produced that whole thing. She did the outreach to the executives. They organized the date, they organized the agenda. That was her thing. And Danny recently did something. There's an organization called the Think Tank for Equity and Inclusion, which is a separate organization, but many guild members are part of that organization. They also create advocacy and awareness for representation on camera. And they publish these really great reports, these fact sheets, like how to represent Latinx people on camera while avoiding cliches, and the do's and don'ts. Mm-hmm. Here's a list of things you're doing. If you're doing these things, you're fucking up. And here's a list of things how to do that correctly, how to represent groups. So that's one of the things they do. And so, like, Danny has been involved with putting together panels with that group, talking about the work they do and how to use the fact sheets. And then sometimes we invite executives to come to our meetings and talk about the efforts they're doing to represent Latinx content. So it's like, the chairs are basically wrangling these events and listening to members' needs and sort of trying to address their needs. It's not a power position like someone on the board would be. It's more like a community activist kind of like position.
Sure.
Yeah.
You deal with the logistics of bringing everything together.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not involved directly with any of the big things like, the ATA negotiations, anything like, no policy work per se. Sure. But like what I do directly affects the community, which I find really gratifying. I help people. I think I help Latinx writers raise their profile and hopefully get hired because of that somehow.
That's awesome. That's really cool that you've found that niche for yourself. Yeah. So final big question about the WGA, Jorge, is, were there any misconceptions you had about being a member that you have since been disabused of? And even more broadly, like, do you think there are widespread misconceptions about the WGA that you would like to disabuse our writing audience of? I'll
answer that in 2 parts. I'll tell you what I think, but I'm also interested in hearing what some of the misconceptions are, but maybe we could talk about some of those. But I think that I already kind of touched on this, was that I was really surprised by the community that I found at the WGA. Like, I really expected the entertainment world to be largely kind of cliquey and hard to break through, hard to sort of make connections with people. And I found through the WGA, it was like largely the opposite. Like, I found it to be like, wow, I'm actually meeting people who are actually really friendly and want to be really helpful and are asking me how my career is going, and, things, and are open to sitting down and having coffee. And, so I found that really surprising. Not that Hollywood is opening a red carpet to everybody. It is tough. Like, even though I have those relationships, it doesn't mean that the carpet is wide open for me for the gigs, right? So I think the community is there, people are helpful, and people want to advocate, but like getting the gigs and keeping your career going is pretty hard, because there's a lot of people who want to do it, and the jobs are fine, and the opportunities the number is finite. So it's not, an infinite number of jobs. So that's still a challenge. But I think the thing that I was surprised mostly about was just like being able to say hello to people who are put on a pedestal as a celebrity writer, finding out that they're just human beings. And that's awesome.
Right.
That's very encouraging. Yeah. That's a very encouraging anecdote.
Yeah.
I think from my impression that, like, the big misconception, or maybe not, of just the idea of the WGA is that once you're in, you get sent a list of jobs you can apply for every week, and you are now a shoo-in for them, and nobody else gets this list.
No, absolutely not true. It's hard, man. Yeah. No, it's hard. When the ATA thing happened, the guild put some money into creating this database that people use, and it was very robust in the early days. People did, like, showrunners were putting up open calls for jobs on this thing, and people were applying to them. People were getting hired. So like it basically replaced our agents for a little while. But once the agents came back, people have been using that less and less, and so that's not as useful anymore. So if the rumor started that there was a list of jobs, it probably came from that database. Sure. But it doesn't really. It served a purpose for as a Band-Aid during a time when we needed it. It's not really used anymore very much. So like we're really kind of relying on our agents again. But here's the thing: the agents get the lists of jobs that are available.
Sure.
And they put their clients up for those jobs, but it's no way is it a shoe-in. You're competing with everybody else in the guild for those jobs. You really are. So as friendly and supportive as everybody is, it's like there is competition, like I think it's friendly competition. Being in the guild is no way a guarantee that you're going to work. There's lots of people who haven't worked for many years, who want, like Glenn Mazzara tells a story about how he got his first job like on Nash Bridges, and then that ended, and then he didn't work for like 2 years. Like he tried because he couldn't pay someone to sneeze on him, and and then he got hired on the Shield because of his relationship with the showrunner. It's not a shoe-in at all. Like I wish it was, but it isn't. That's definitely a misconception.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of like, to your point, you asked 100 different writers how they got in, and all of them have different stories. And I think that there is, because the U.S. education system functions with the assumption that like you get a degree to get good at a skill, you get an entry-level job using that skill, and then you move up the ladder. And that's not really it's not that linear in the entertainment industry. Mm-hmm. So these committees and these organizations and these guilds that like have some level of influence that, you can't just get into, you can't just apply for the guild. I think that there is an implicit assumption that, okay, well, that must be where the linearness comes from. There's got to be a linear path somewhere in there.
There isn't. Not at all.
And there just
it's a free for all. It's every year, like staffing season is like the Hunger Games every year. It is. It's a living Hunger Games, but so like sometimes you're up for a job against some of your friends, and it's really frustrating. It can be really frustrating. It can be really heartbreaking. But I think what happens is like a writer will catch some luck and get hired on a show and stay on that show for a couple of years and move up the ladder and build a resume, and that kind of keeps them going. So it's like momentum. Once you catch some momentum, that's what it really is. It's about catching that momentum and riding it and keeping it going. Like I see a lot of writers that came out of those programs with me that have had that kind of thing happen, and it's great. That's really it. It's you got to catch that break, and you've just got to keep the momentum going. But like that, the early days are hard. Like the early days are tough. Like there's no guarantee. I tell people to definitely take the fellowships into very serious consideration. I also tell people, if you can afford it, to look at trying to get into the support staff world as a writing assistant or a writing PA. Make friends with people who are doing those jobs and ask them how they got them and try to get their advice. WGA just started this really good writers like assistance program. I think some of the, I don't know, you got to look at the criteria before you apply. I don't know. I think it's not open to everybody, but I think people who qualify should definitely consider that. Besides the fellowships, I think people should look at some of the more legit, reputable competition platforms. Like I've seen people do really well with a platform called Coverfly, Screencraft, Stage 32, and Roadmap Writers. Those are all different. I think two of those might overlap, but I think they're all different, mostly all different. And that's the thing that didn't really exist when I was coming up. And I'm not endorsing them because out of my own personal experience, but I've seen people use those platforms to really good effect. And basically the idea is you keep working on your material, you upload your material, you create a profile, you submit to contests. Once you start placing, your scores go up, and those companies are really, they're designed, their business models to help people break in if they break a writer, it's good for them. The more writers they break, the better it is for them, because they can say, look, this is the list of writers that we broke, and more people come to their site and spend money. You just have to choose the strategies that work for you. For me, I was dead set on getting into a fellowship. So every year I would apply and I would try to write better and build more relationships until I finally got into one of those. And that's what worked for me. But it's not the only path.
Do you think the connections that you were making in the web series world aided you in that way? Like your indie, how does your indie background influence your current career?
A great question. I think the things that translated, I was doing so much production on set a lot, really just having to produce, so that by the time I got to cover set from my own episode, I was really already sort of well versed in production. Writers usually, good showrunners will send their writers out to set to cover to basically produce their episodes. And so that really helped me a lot. I think that helped me get the job too, because I was able to say that I've produced whatever it was at that point. And because production is scalable, a 4-person crew operates very much the same way as a 40-person crew, it's just the hierarchy's different. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's expandable. So I think production experience helped. But in terms of and just again, that whole thing of that I said at the top of the podcast about, that was the time I spent writing and producing indie stuff before building my credits. So that helped. But I found the two worlds to be very separate. When I first got here to LA, I had all my friends that were in digital, that did digital stuff, but none of them had any connections or relationships, very little relationships between that world and TV. So I was trying to figure out, it was like starting from scratch again a little bit, honestly.
Interesting. Yeah. The indie people tend to know each other, and the traditional people tend to know each other, and very few bridges, it sounds
very few. It was like that for me, but I don't know, it could be different for someone else.
I think there are bridges, they're just fewer and further between, is the understanding that I've gotten. Because obviously, we all have the anecdotes off the top of our heads of the Issa Raes of the world doing web series and getting picked up. Tintified, had obviously, popular people. I think America Ferrera was always attached to it, but it went technically from a web series to a Netflix show.
Yeah, I mean,
those exist.
Yeah, that happens. That's a different thing. I think that's an indie creator making the leap. Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of those. Yeah, there's High Maintenance. There was Broad City.
Caleb Gallo technically got optioned by Lionsgate. I don't know if they are specifically developing more Gay and Wondrous Life of Caleb Gallo, but Brian Jordan Alvarez was behind that, and I know he's gone on to bigger and better things, but that definitely launched him. So yeah, what I'm saying is anecdotally those things happen, and I think that a lot of indie people hope that that'll happen for them, but just like getting into a fellowship, it's lightning in a bottle. There is an element of luck to it.
Yeah, you have to be in it to win it. I mean, you got to do something. You have to write, you have to produce, you have to I just recommend having a strategy, whatever that is. I think doing things willy-nilly, throwing spaghetti at the wall, maybe works for some people, but I think it really deciding where you want to be and making everything you do serve in service to that goal, that vision that you have for yourself, I think is the way to go.
Jack of all trades, master of none, kind of a thing.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Because there's so much going on. It's it's a storm of activity here that you have to kind of be a laser about. This is what I want to do. This is where I want to be, and this is everything I do is going to be moving towards that goal. Is helpful, I think.
Fair enough. Okay, so final thing that I wanted to just chat about, since this is something that you and I have in common, is grad school.
Yeah.
So we are both graduates of the Long Island University Brooklyn's Writing and Producing for Television MFA. So I am curious, what went into your decision to get a graduate degree? Did you go to film school before that? What did you get out of the program beyond, a little bit of employment for a couple of years?
Yeah.
What would you say to people about your grad school experience, small and big?
Well, I like I said, I was doing a lot of digital stuff around that time. I still was doing it when I was still in the program in the TV writer studio, and it just so happened. I don't know. I caught an ad somewhere, and I don't know for this presentation that Norman was going to give about it, and the description of it sounded really interesting. And I knew at the time I've been doing all this digital stuff, collaborating with friends, and doing a lot of work with friends, and doing a lot of my own work. And I was actually I was a web programmer by day, making 6 figures, making a pretty decent living, but really miserable, and spending a lot of my own money writing and producing my own stuff. And I thought how wonderful it might be if I actually could get paid to do it instead of paying for it, right?
Sure.
So my thoughts were gravitating towards television and trying to do it on that level. And so I saw an ad and I went to this presentation that Norman gave at this theater in LIU with a good friend of mine on my birthday. It was like on my birthday that year. And he gave this really compelling presentation. You probably saw it. It's him on stage, and Lewis Black is in his video talking about how great Norman is.
I don't know if I ever saw that, because I was in college in Portland when I just Googled TV writing programs, and it was one of the ones on the list. But I have since seen Norman speak quite a bit, and it's hard to deny he's got a magnetism about him and an enthusiasm.
Yes, he's got a lot of charm. And so he charmed me, and I was like, wow, I really think I want to do this. And I applied and I got in, and it was great. It was the first year, and, like everything, it had its challenges and its growing pains and its, kinks that it needed to work out. But what was really great about it was that, again, the sense of community, and we got to write together. It operates like a writer's room. It's supposed to anyway. But writers' rooms can be really dysfunctional too. So there was a lesson to be learned there, like how to operate within a room of people and make it work, so in some ways, it's some of the best training you'll ever get, because if you can make that room work well, you can make any room work well. Not that, and I'm not complaining, I'm saying that it's a room full of student writers who have no experience. And so there's a lot of learning curve in terms of how to operate with other people and play well with other people, right? That's the big lesson you're learning there, because it's 12 people or 20 people who have never really had to do that before. So as chaotic as that could sometimes be, if you can figure out how to make that work with 20 people who've never done it before in various degrees of writing ability, some people just for the first time writing, some people have done it for a bit. So it's a very interesting petri dish that you're creating there. Bad or good. I took away all the positives from it, and I think the positive was that was great training for any kind of environment that you're ever going to find yourself in terms of writers' rooms. And I wrote a couple of pieces out of that. I wrote my episode for the show that we created. I wrote an episode, another pilot. We shot the thing we shot. I was the AD for our pilot. So that was a really fun experience and educational experience. And the relationships I built there were really valuable, especially with Norman. So I think all those things, it's like anything, there are pros and cons. And I think that, but also, case in point, my first job ever here in Hollywood was because of another cohort member.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there was another student in the class that had been working for this company, this true crime production company, and got me an interview with them, and I got my first job. And since then, I've only been out of work really when I've chosen to be out of work. So the big lesson to learn, I think, with that and any other environment like that or any other experience like that are the relationships you build, and to, go in with things with as much positive energy as possible, because, entertainment can be really chaotic and crazy too. I think the skills to take away are just about collaboration and positivity and being focused on the goals at hand.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. And anyone who's curious about a deeper dive into film school undergrad, film school graduate programs, definitely check out our episode. I think it was our first official non-introductory episode of this podcast. So definitely go back and check that out, where I talk in depth about my experience a couple of years after Jorge, but sounds like it was not dissimilar. Yeah. I will also say having an MFA allows me to teach, and 2 of my 5 jobs are teaching at the graduate level, which I would not be able to do without the MFA.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, obviously I've done a little bit of that too. The TV Writers Studio, all in all, I think was a great experience though. I think, like I said, it's sometimes a challenge to get a group of people like that together to collaborate, and learning how to collaborate is the job. I think that experience is really great training, and, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of the program. I'm a fan of Norman.
Yeah, me too.
Ken runs it now. I'm a fan of Ken.
Yep, Ken's doing some cool stuff.
I once said something to Norman, and I swear to God, he's used it as the tagline for the program ever since. Like I inadvertently said to Norman once, every time I walk onto that lot of Steiner, I feel like I'm walking onto my future.
He definitely uses that.
He uses that, right?
I've heard him use that.
You heard him use that, right? Uh-huh. Oh my God.
100%.
I have to start charging him for that.
Make it an NFT.
That's hilarious.
Jorge, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, just inspirationally, like just keep pushing. It's a tough business. It's tough to crack. You know, the WGA thing is a little bit of a mystery. I hope I demystified it a little bit now, but it's also not the key. I think what the key is, like, once the key is relationships. Look, here's my threefold or fourfold path. Like, basically, always be writing and always be improving your writing. That's number one. Your craft is the most important thing, because like no one's going to hire you if you're a shitty writer. The second thing is be a good human being. You know, just be your best self. Like, people want to work with people who aren't jerks, because you're spending long hours a day with people in the same room. And when you go to production, it's really stressful, and no one wants to work with someone who's making it more stressful. That's number two. The third one is put yourself out there and meet people and mingle and build relationships and help people. You know, like that's like part of that is knowing when to ask for help, but also knowing when to help other people, because you can, at any moment in the hierarchy of this journey, you could be as helpful to, there's people behind you that you could be helpful to. So I think those are the three, and tenacity. That's the fourth one. Just don't give up.
Okay.
A friend of mine, a friend of mine, and this is not to scare anyone, but this happens to people sometimes. They have trouble and with their careers and don't work for a while. And a friend of mine hadn't been in a room for almost 10 years and recently just got hired on a big show.
Oh, wow.
She was ready. She was like about to pack it in, and she was like, she gave it one more shot, and suddenly she's on. I don't want to say details because I don't want to give it away. But it was super inspiring. She didn't give up. And just as she thought she was going to, she got this really, really great gig. And, it's not a story that I haven't heard. I've heard that before, so hopefully it doesn't take that long for most people, but it happens. I think if you do all the things that I was talking about, my other 3 points, if you do all 4 points, eventually it'll happen. You just have to stay in the game and keep producing stuff.
I love that. That is an inspiring note to go out on. So, Christina.
Thanks so much to Kelsey Rauber for our theme music, Kaylee Brown for our podcast art, Ezra Lee for editing this episode, and to all of you for listening. Links to learn more about them and Jorge, as always, are in our episode description. And thank you to our Booby VIPs who are $10 patrons on Patreon: Shannon Sprengler, Jules Piggott, Rain Bernal, Kelsey Rauber, Jerry Maravilla, Norman Steinberg, and Shayna Rose Woolley.
If you would like a name shout out at the end of every episode, please feel free to subscribe at patreon.com/breakingoutpod so you get notified of all of our new episodes dropping every other Thursday, plus that great bonus content that we mentioned, and to rate us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app if you haven't already. And beyond just the 5 stars, actually writing a review goes a really long way, and we appreciate it every time. So thank you, those of you who have done so already. Next episode, we are going to be talking about problematic faves and navigating art made by people who we aren't thrilled with, either from the beginning or have learned some things about them. So join us for that discussion, weigh in on social media and on email, and we will talk to you then.